think the $50 an ounce is an excise tax on mostly production, so that it's in a pound, actually.
In which bill? Three different things.
Okay, the Amiano bill that speaks of an excise tax of $50 an ounce, and so does, I believe, the CCI initiative. Tax and Regulate is quiet on that particular issue and leaves it to the local communities to decide what the tax level should be. But I think this is actually an issue that needs some more discussion, and I'd like to get the audience's reaction on this. One of the issues with legalizing marijuana is if you actually totally legalize it, like parsley, and have no laws about it in particular, the price will plummet. What is the likely free market price of marijuana if there's nothing against the law, no laws against the law? Well, marijuana is sort of like an herb, it's like tea, or like tobacco actually, which does have a tax. Those herbs sell for a couple dollars an ounce. So you would be looking at a couple dollars an ounce, or maybe a nickel a joint, if there were no taxes on it. Now, I don't think for one hot second that the American public would accept marijuana being that cheap. I think I think a decent respect for the herb demands that it be priced somewhat similarly, maybe to beer or wine somehow. I'm not exactly sure how, but you put an excise tax on it, and that serves as a price support to some extent. But of course, if you make the excise tax too high, then you generate a big underground market again, because it becomes too profitable to smuggle it. So it's a delicate issue of deciding, what the price should be. Now, $50 an ounce probably would bring the price of marijuana down once you put in all the other costs. The retail price would probably be around $100 an ounce if you had a $50 per ounce. Now, $100 an ounce, that's a third of the current price, basically. And personally, I sort of think that's a reasonable price for pot. So what, a joint would be maybe $3, something like that. Now, but let me ask the audience, how many here think that $3 is a good price for a joint? Or how many people think marijuana should be more expensive than $3 for a joint? Okay, some people think it should be more. How many people think it should be less expensive than $3 a joint? Well, you see, actually we had fewer hands for that than for more. So maybe $3 an ounce is a good target price, but the issue is going to be whether we can prevent people from cheating, because if it's a $50 ounce excise tax, there certainly is some incentive for people to sort of grow it secretly and try to sell it without the excise tax. I don't think that's going to be too big a problem, because I don't think that people are going to spend a lot of time seeking out underground sources when they could just go down to the local neighborhood store and buy it. But who knows, I could be wrong about that. But I think it's a really critical issue that still needs some exploration.
I would just add that in other countries where it's not targeted jail time, in Canada, it's roughly half the price on the street than it is here in America. So if you take that rough known production cost of half of our cost, you know that you can inflate it by that other half of taxes, and we're not paying any more today than we are with new taxes. It's just being made up in the difference of that. And I think part of the fear and amongst this community, which is mostly a producing community, is that you're not going to be able to make your living with growing cannabis. And I don't think that's true. I think that Dale's mentioning a wholesale commercial market, much like a tobacco type. supply, those boutique crops, those high quality strains, they're not going to go down in price. They're still going to be very high. The $50 ounce is going to have to be tacked on to whatever boutique cost is on top of it, whether you're organic or specialized or a specific type of strain. It's going to go up just like wine. It's not going to meet a specific type of price and stabilize at that level. It's going to fluctuate depending upon what strain and characteristic you have, because a 6-week indica is not going to get the same price post-illegal market that a 12-week sativa does. It's more production costs, more time, more problems to go wrong, less of a chance to get that output that's correct. So a good farmer is going to still get paid to be a good farmer.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about this too, because one of the things that I don't know if anyone's really mentioned about the Tax and Regulated Initiative is it allows people to share marijuana too, so you can be giving away ounces to your friends or getting ounces from your friends. So that's kind of a nice thing. But I'm very concerned. I don't want to see the production in the hands of just a few individuals. I like the fact that the way it is right now, a lot of people can make a little bit of money, enough to get by or whatever with cultivating cannabis, and I don't want to see that destroyed. We have something similar actually, if you look at the way Kentucky handles its tobacco production, is that within each community, people are licensed to grow a small amount, enough to just make the living on their farm, but no one is given a license to grow all the tobacco for some big corporation. And so this is the kind of thing where within the local community, you're going to have to, once this is passed, you're going to have to work very closely and do the lobbying that it takes to make sure that the local small producer is protected on this. And the other point I was going to make about is, people were afraid about the price dropping too much and not being able to get a fair return on their labor and investment, is that if that was the case, then right now everyone would be smoking Mexican pot and you wouldn't be making any money anyway. So we've seen the way that this has worked is that people would rather, in fact, I would say this, I've been in a situation of people wanting to smoke Mexican pot, even if it's offered to them, even though they say your pot's too strong, and they say, well, I've got some Mexican, it's like, well, let's smoke your pot. I really don't think that we need to worry too much about that, but it is going to have to be worked very closely in the community to make sure that the protections are there, because I don't want to see it consolidated into a few growers.
And on that, let me say that the Amiano bill is going to incorporate some language specifically directing that the production stay in the hands of smaller growers and to discourage large-scale corporate involvement.
Next question. Is there another question?
And let's not forget, guys, that fast food didn't put restaurants out of business. Restaurants didn't put your kitchen out of business. There's going to be multiple models in different communities that are going to work differently depending on how they want to set it up. There's some communities like out in Texas where there's wet and dry counties. So those places that have the NIMBY attitude of not in it for me, not in my backyard, they still enjoy the tax dollars. Because right now all those dollars are going into the prohibition costs of cannabis. And let's make no mistake, for the first time in history, it has flipped upside down where we now have more people in prison for possession than we do for sales. And this is a report by the government on this. There's more people in prison for possession than sales, and let's not forget that sales is not caught in the act of selling. It's intent. And most of those are not actually sales. So we have a serious issue going on. There's some estimates nationwide, they're looking at, I believe, $41 billion when you look at the lost taxes and the cost of cannabis prohibition. In California, just here alone, the State Board of Equalization, I believe, is looking at between 1.2 and 1.8 billion just in California. Our current policy has failed, and we have an opportunity to make safer communities. Talk about save the children. Let's put them in school instead of in jail. And let's have that conversation, because I found when we talk to the soccer moms, when we talk to the religious leaders, we agree on 95% of it. It's just how to get there. And it's up to you to put a face on this so that they realize this isn't a free-for-all legalization. This is good people like you who are trying to make this happen. So put that face on it, have that conversation. Go to taxcannabis.org. You remembered, yes.
What do you guys, of the four panel, what do you think is the best thing to actually educate not only us as cannabis users, but the broad, all full spectrum of California voters on the full implications of the voter initiative bills and how to organize and educate
the question is what's the best way to go forward and educate voters about the bills and the regulation and about the initiatives
and basically how it's going to be really regulated and taxed. I mean, the question I had of like, is it going to be $50 per transaction, whether you're a producer or buyer? If you're presenting it as like tax and regulate, how are you actually, or how would you advise educating the full spectrum of California voters on how to be fully educated on how it's actually going to play out and look?
You know, the way I facetiously like to answer this question is, I think if you want to get an idea what legalization is like, go to the Netherlands. All right? I think if more Americans were aware of what an everyday thing marijuana is in the Netherlands, where you can walk into any store, any coffee shop if you're over 18 and just buy it, and there's no impact, there's no visible impact. Marijuana is like coffee or Coca-Cola or beer or anything else. You cannot tell that society has gone to pot, as they say. I think that is the best lesson, and I think that Californians have actually been picking up some of that as a result of the experience with the pot clubs, like in LA in particular, because everybody knows in LA that anybody can get a doctor's recommendation, all right? But, you know, for all of that, it's again not like there's this huge public pot problem in LA. The only problem they have is a land use problem with some people who, you know, are sited too near schools and cause a parking fuss. Well, that's trivial stuff that can be fixed. But I think Californians are coming around to realizing, hey, there's no problem with letting adults go in and buy this stuff and walk out on the street. You know, I think that's the best lesson.
All right, and what I would say is that this is one we're grappling with all the time with the West Coast Leaf newspaper, which I would say one of the things you need to do is get copies. It's a free newspaper, but you can subscribe. And we love advertisers are the way that we support this, so anybody who would like to buy an ad, that would be very helpful to us. But basically, we're always looking at how do we convey the information accurately and in a way that gives a positive and credible message to our readers and for our readers to carry on and share with other people. So we're going to be providing some of that stylistic and language approach, you know, because we have actually people here at this table have been contributors to the West Coast Leaf, and we get writing from the top people in the country who know the issue the best and so forth. Now, when it comes to the other question about what are the main things we're going to have to fight with, I think one of the things you're going to have to point out is that once this is passed, people are probably going to drive a little slower on the freeways because they're worried about people driving really crazy and so forth. But we all know that pot smokers, the problem is that they stop at the stoplight and they forget to drive again. It's not that they're driving too fast, it's, you know, and so somehow we're going to have to convince people that there's not any public safety threat, but in fact it's a benefit because we're going to have fewer people drinking alcohol. You're going to have people being more cautious. And the other thing is that it gives people an opportunity to be honest with their children and with their families and friends about cannabis, which the current situation doesn't have. The other thing that I believe our opponents are going to attack us on is the question about, was Prop 215 the camel's nose in the tent, and this was all part of this bigger scam? And I think that what we need to express to them is quite the opposite, that the next step that we take has to be to protect Proposition 215 by getting some of the confusion out of the market, by making sure that the patients are protected, but by separating the casual users away from the patients who really need it and so forth. That's one of the things that we will achieve by allowing people to have better access to it. Or another way to look at it is to finish the job that was started with Proposition 215. 215 shows you that sick people can handle using marijuana and be responsible, contributing members of society. Now, if a sick person can do it, certainly a healthy person can do it, and it's not the other way around. And so these are some of the things that I would like to advance forward. But primarily, like I said, we're going to be talking about this very issue for the next year and a half. We're in a very good situation because the election is more than a year away. But we need to resolve these issues. Oh, excuse me, a year and a second. Well, actually, I'm done, so I'll pass it on to somebody else who's going to tell you that I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, I actually just realized a couple days ago that I've been saying a year and a half for a half of a year now, and I needed to change that up a little bit. One thing that Dale mentioned about going over to the Netherlands, I'm sure many of us wish we could. But what's remarkable that I've been noticing is that the Netherlands are coming here. Because those folks that were driving the business overseas came here and were blown away at the safe access and the level of industry that California had achieved. They're now coming over here to help understand our models because they're coming up against something rather strange over there. The folks that are currently doing business are the children of the children that fought for the right, and they don't remember how to fight for that right. So to a large degree, some of them that are coming up against similar issues that we've been facing for over a decade here, we're starting to actually work together and find that we now have best practices that they can share. So well done, California.
And it turns out that the pressure is on. We have 360 days to get this initiative passed, not a year.
And here's the good news. Our initiative now has officially 360,000 signatures. Tax and Regulate Cannabis 2010 will be on the ballot. We're over halfway already. In about 30% of the time, we will make it happen. Again, there's 2 tables out here if any of you need to sign. We got them raising their hands in the back. Any of you qualified California voters. But back to this gentleman in the front. I believe the gateway theory truly came from the lack of education, or perhaps the DARE community, because we told kids all these horror stories about pot, and then nothing bad happened. So why should they believe us when it comes to methamphetamines or crack, when something bad might in fact happen? So it's having that honest conversation. If we can flip that DARE community into, contraindications and education. We have now over 6,000 Oaksterdam University graduates. We have over 3,000 volunteers signed up now just for the Tax and Regulate. So that's upwards of nearly 10,000 people that are working on this issue, and every one of them talks to 10 people. We win. In the next year, we have an opportunity to have this conversation with individuals that have lost their resources. We are losing public safety programs left and right. Mothers won't be able to go into Planned Parenthood soon in many communities. They're not going to be getting their food stamps in many communities. The workfare program, which took people from welfare to workfare, is about to end, and those individuals are about to lose everything that they have as well as far as government assistance. So even those wobblers today, when we ask them in 1 year, I believe they'll be ready to say yes to redirecting those necessary resources to communities, to roads, to schools, to the funds, and it's really every one of you that are going to help us make that happen.
Just to dovetail on the question about education, I think our movement has gone through a couple of phases. I was involved with one of the first phases, which is a court ruling type educational process. We went from court ruling to court ruling about how we educated the media and the public, because that was the only way we could break through. We've matured through that, and we're now into lobbying and infrastructure and creating trade associations, and we're much more beyond where we were 10 years ago, when really we were in the darkest hour, living from court ruling as to whether or not we were going to have freedom, really wondering whether or not the state law was going to withstand the federal challenge. Our state law is here, and we're ready to make a new state law. And just because we make this law and it passes next year, may that not be the end of the debate. May that be just the beginning, and we make further changes and further moves forward to what we want in our future, and not let the old Nixonian system of outdated and unjust laws around our issue survive any longer.
So we should wind up now. We've got a very, one last question. No, okay, we have one last question. Solve below, okay, what is the last question? I'm sorry, I can't hear this.
If I might reiterate what she said, the point that the gal in the front was making is that the small medicinal cannabis farmers are already here, so we might want to look at regulation that requires the hemp farmers to work around the medicinal farmers that are already in those outdoor areas, rather than giving equal opportunity to anyone to farm wherever they choose. Is that about? Okay.
Yeah, well, there's concern here about larger groups moving in again on this, and I did want to emphasize that part of it, I think we're agreed, all of the proponents are agreed that we want to have generally small-scale farming, and it is easy to keep large corporations out of this with a modicum of simple licensing and regulation. I don't see that as being a major issue, but it is something that we have to attend to. One thing I want people to understand is none of the bills that we're talking about, none of the initiatives, nor the Amiano bill would affect patients' rights under Proposition 215. So people who have medical co-ops could continue to have them. With that, one more quick question. What was the other quick question?
When it becomes legal and people are growing the male plant, the hemp plant, how close does, or how far away I should say, does the female plants have to stay away, not to pollinate?
There's not a really specific difference. What they do and what they have historically done is you grow trees around your hemp fields because that traps the pollen in. The hemp farmers usually want that pollen, so they're not really interested in having you go to your marijuana plant. The question was, how do you block the hemp pollen from getting to your marijuana, or how far does it travel? The answer is it can travel across the ocean. So it can really go far, but in reality, once you put trees or something around hemp fields, that will trap the bulk of the pollen in there. And so in Holland, they're not having a problem with that. That's the main thing I can tell you. They're not having a problem with that. So I think we're trying to, we wanted to actually give our closing comment.
I would only add in this comment, let us have a problem with hemp farmers creating a problem for marijuana farmers. May that be a problem that we have on our hands. Right now, that's not a problem we have here. Nor is it, from my understanding, a huge problem in Canada, where it is legal to grow hemp outside, and there are adult outdoor growers there. It doesn't seem to be creating the same dynamic that we think it might be.
I'd also like to finish responding to your question as well. As far as allowing these special interest groups in, it's up to the local cities and counties to determine the size of the grow operations that they're going to allow in, should they allow commercial cultivation. That being said, this is one of the senses of urgency that we have. There are a lot of special interest groups out there very interested, sniffing around our industry, and if we wait till 2012, which one of them determines the legislature makes in your own home. We're trying to pass 2010 now, so that can't be taken away, that you can always produce your personal grow for yourself, and you don't have to go to the CVS to go buy a pack from Philip Morris, okay? That's why right now, that's why 2010, because we don't know about 2012. We don't know what it's going to look like, and we don't know who's going to be writing that language. However, I welcome another 2012 initiative to take what we've done in 2010 to the next level. We can definitely do that without question. And to your second point, I would say the $50 tax is a very good trade-off to the federal rate. Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and let each of these gentlemen with quick closing comments. We have about 10 minutes left. Dale Geringer.
Anyways, they've given us a little extra time, so if there's one other question or something, we might be able to take it. Otherwise, we're just going to wrap up here because we've given you a lot of information to chew on, and basically, there's one more question.
What about medical doctors and them not having to worry about their licenses taken away?
The question was about doctors having their medical licenses taken away, and I presume that has to do with giving medical marijuana recommendations. Well, first off, we have the decision at the federal level, the CONAMP decision, that says that it's protected free speech for a doctor to recommend or approve marijuana for a patient. So they're very protected there. Where they run into the problem is with the California Medical Association, the medical board. And where we've seen it mainly happening has been one of two situations. Either a doctor who's got some other kind of a legal situation going on, like Medicare fraud, for example, that creates complications. And the other situation is doctors who recommend to minors. And so far, from what I understand, the cases involving that have all been where they have parental consent and no one has lost their license over that at all. So is there any doctor who's lost their license over this subject? Yeah, the other one I know is a guy in LA, and it was because of Medicare fraud.
There have been a couple who've gotten in trouble for sloppy record keeping, and I gotta say, there are a few sloppy doctors out there, but I don't think any doctor who's been practicing in a reasonable fashion has lost their license over medical marijuana in California.
The other case that one thing, here, I'll give you Jeff.
I would just echo that the only concern would be if this measure is passed is that I don't think it would attract more attention to doctors, necessarily protect them anymore, but it would make, I think, it less of a focus point on them as long as what Dale pointed out, that they still kept good records, did the examinations that they needed to. Most doctors that are having problems right now, noted by Chris, is the licensing body for them, or because they're not practicing medicine in the nature that the medical board wants them to do. So whether it's a short-term visit, not tracking medical records, or having a background, or giving them alternatives, those things come up with doctors. They have a standard that they have to keep.
And yeah, I would say that one exception you might want to look at is Molly Fry. And Dr. Molly Fry over in Cruel, she actually got a federal sentence of 5 years, I think. But what that was she was not only providing recommendations, she would give people a plant, she would give them a few grams of marijuana along with the recommendation. Yeah, and so they ended up getting charged with sales of marijuana and cultivation with intent to distribute. So as long as your doctor's not doing that, most doctors have figured out they're not supposed to do that. The Conant decision is fairly clear on that whole thing. And so basically, we're wrapping up at this point. So I just wanted to, again, to reiterate that there are several initiatives out there. You need to keep track of which one you sign, because if you sign the same initiative, you can sign all of them, but if you sign any of them twice, they strike 2 signatures out for every bad signature, every duplicate that they find, because they presume that there's others that they missed. So be cautious, and that's why I'm pointing this out, because this is a yellow one. Remember which one you signed, because it's going to be important later on when the next person asks you to sign a petition. You can sign all 4 of these petitions, no problem. Whichever one gets the most votes, any policy that's in conflict with the others, the one that gets the most votes is the one that comes in. So if you like one more than the others, don't work against the others. Make sure that the one that you like gets passed. Whatever comes after this election, the cops are not going to lay down. They're not going to give up. We're going to continue to fight. We're going to have to become very sophisticated in our approach towards talking to our local officials to make sure that they don't do the kind of things we're all worried about. Making some monopoly, creating a monopoly, or trying to ban it completely. So this is going to be, there's a whole nother generation of work that lies ahead. But we're standing on soil that no one has stood on in this state for almost 100 years, which is that you can legally sell and produce marijuana now within the legal construct. The United States Supreme Court looked at that, and they said that we don't care whether it's medical or not, you can't do it. Well, so what does that tell us? That means that if we make a law that's not medical, we're not going to be any worse off with the feds than we are with our current law. They've already told us they don't care about sick and dying people. They care about marijuana. And so what they're doing now is what they're going to continue to do, or they will back off. And I think that what we're going to see is other states doing similar things and the steady backing off that it takes to do that. The last thing I would say is that whatever happens in November of next year, and we're hoping it'll be a profound change by the voters legalizing marijuana, at least I think we're all hoping that. But whether that happens or not, the current laws are going to have a role in the next step. And the current laws, if we lose at the ballot box, are going to be what's in effect. And so I urge all of you to consider getting a copy of this booklet or downloading it from the internet, Cannabis Yields and Dosage. It explains the current laws, it explains the science and the math of not only of growing and using medical marijuana, but of how courts look at things, what the appeals courts has held in different cases, and so forth. Under the current paradigm, this book can keep you out of prison if you follow what is inside of it. Under the new paradigm, past Proposition 215, this is still going to be important, past CR 2010 or whatever it is that we get next year. It's still going to be important, but we're going to have to start moving on a whole other level. And so I really look forward to it next year's Harvest Fest. We're going to be sitting up here with a panel that will call it, Now It's Legal, Now What?
And I remind you people, the Aviano legalization bill is going to come up for hearings in January. It would be really helpful if people would tell their legislators, people, that to support this bill. You can do that actually on the California Normal website or a bunch of other websites out there. But anybody who has contact with a candidate for state or public office should now bring up the question of legalizing marijuana. Let's keep it out there and let's put the pressure on the politicians.
All right, thank you so much, Joe. Male Dale and the female Dale, if you haven't figured this out. We just like to confuse y'all. With one parting thought, and this is something we can all agree on. Current policy has failed. Cannabis is safer. And we have an opportunity to have safer communities by redirecting these dollars, these valuable dollars, into our communities, our schools, transportation, public safety, these services. I would like to thank my esteemed panel up here today. Yes, indeed. But more importantly, keep it going for yourself. Thank you for being here tonight. Please visit us, taxcannabis.org, and find out how to make it happen. Thank you.
And we can all agree that the Harvest Dance is a great event, that Sonoma County is a great county, that this is a great little town, Sebastopol, and Mitcho's a great guy, and he's going to talk to you in a second now. Thank you all. You're terrific.
We're going to take a 5-minute break while we round up our panelists, and we have another panel that will be on the future of the cannabis movement, all right? So if you're one of these people and you're out in the audience, Mickey Martin, Rob Campia, Mickey Norris, William Panzer, come on up here and we'll get you guys set up. All right, so we're going to get going with our next panel here on the future of the cannabis movement. And our panelists tonight, we have Dave McCulloch from Sonoma's Patients Group, a longtime advocate and a longtime person out there in the trenches with us every day. Right next to him is Mickey Norris. I have a little thing here on Mickey. Co-creator of the photo exhibit project Human Rights on the Drug War, known as Human Rights 95, co-author of Shattered Lives. Right? Director of the Cannabis Consumers Campaign. Are you still on the Family Council of Drug Awareness? Somewhat there. And currently Mickey is the managing editor of West Coast Leaf Magazine. They have a great group over there, so you might want to check them out. Well, Mickey Martin here is the founder and former director of Tainted. Tainted, yay! He's also founder of Compassionate Medicinal Edibles. He's a founding board member of the Medical Cannabis Safety Council as well. And he's the current associate editor for West Coast Cannabis Magazine. And finally here, Don Duncan. Don Duncan is he served on the board of directors since he co-founded Americans for Safe Access, ASA, in 2002. That too is one of the beneficiaries of this event. So I will just get out of the way and let you guys talk. Right?
Well, I think one of the things about the future of the movement is, we heard a little bit about it earlier today when they were talking about self-regulation and getting the regulation in place before the government does it. Groups like the MCSC and other groups like that, and laboratory testing and things like that are things we do have to move forward to. And it was important, like the last panel was talking about, getting these initiatives passed, regardless of which one we get passed, moving forward and getting something passed. The model is going to be different from state to state, just like they were talking about earlier with the alcohol. It's going to be the same with cannabis. But there's always going to be dispensaries, there's always going to be small collectors and people growing it at home. I think in California, at least in this part of California, we're going to see it analogous to the California wine industry. You know, this is wine country. We know how it's supposed to work. Cannabis and wine go hand in hand when you stop and think about it. You know, and that's really the way I think a lot of it's going to turn out. And the rest of it, we're going to figure it out as we go. You know, we're really at the infancy of this whole thing. Don't you guys agree?
Hello, my name is Mickey Norris, and I'm have lots of hats. One of them is the managing editor of the West Coast Leaf newspaper. I hope you'll all pick up a copy of that. Another one is I'm the director of the Cannabis Consumers Campaign, which encourages people to come out of the closet and take a stand for our equal rights as cannabis consumers. We have some cannabis consumers in the house here. Yay! We need to come out and we need to stand up for our rights, or else we're going to have the status quo. Okay, so I'm going to give two different scenarios, at least two different scenarios of the future of the movement. One is we continue on the same track as we are right now, where there is not enough change going fast enough, that prohibition will still continue if we don't pass these initiatives that are coming up, if we don't get legislation that Amiano has been proposing, if enough people don't get involved and help to make the change. What will happen is we'll continue with our prohibition scheme of regulation, which means an increase of more arrests, more people getting arrested, more prosecutions, more incarcerations, and we've seen that already. In last year, we have more arrests than we've ever had in California, and we still have a good 1,500 people sitting in prisons in California, and more people just sitting in probably in jails as we speak. So that's a real possibility, that if not enough people get involved and demand change, we can still have the discrimination continue against cannabis consumers. People will still be subjected to drug testing and the discrimination that comes along with drug testing in the workplace. People will not be able to get jobs. People will lose their jobs if they have one, or their benefits. So this is what's happening now. This can continue. Are you happy with that? I hope not. So hopefully more other examples of discrimination are custody battles between parents, or losing your custody of your children when you do get arrested. That's still a real risk that's happening today and can continue to happen if we don't get the change that we want. So, as an optimist, I'm going to say that's hopefully not too much more in our future, that more people are making a commitment to getting involved and making change and demanding change for our equal rights as cannabis consumers, because we deserve nothing less than that, because we are the good people. Cannabis consumers happen to be some of the nicest, most intelligent, hardworking, creative, decent people that I know. And we do not deserve this kind of treatment that we're getting today, and we should not have to live our lives still vulnerable to the consequences of the drug war and marijuana prohibition. So as an optimist and as somebody who's working every day to change this and see that there are more and more people working every day to change this, it does give me hope. And also, the change in Washington also gives me hope, with a president that has already made some overtures towards our rights and towards states' rights, which is a really great thing that's happened with the Obama memo that just was recently issued last month, where he told people to, or actually this was in May, I believe, he issued a memo that said that in the states that if the federal government has no overreaching kind of business in the states, that they should allow the states to go forward, because states have traditionally been of social experiments, and we can continue on that path. And he has indicated last month that he will allow states to go forward with their own policies and will call off the federal government unless they are also in violation of the state policies. So, if we keep going along that path, then what we've seen is more and more places opening up. We have much more access than we've ever had. We have probably now in California more places to buy cannabis over the counter than the Netherlands has now. So I think that we have accomplished quite a bit, and we're moving in a good direction, whereas the Netherlands is moving kind of in a more conservative. They're really closing down some of their coffee shops and some of their access, trying to rein it in. Excuse me, kind of missed my mouth there. So, I had the opportunity in March to go to the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs meeting. I have this, Chris. And I came away from that. I went there thinking that the United Nations will be the way we can make change, to put enough pressure on the international community to demand that we respect human rights, and the drug war, the way it has been operating, has been violating our human rights in many, many ways. But I left leaving the United Nations feeling that that is not the avenue for the changes we want to make, because it's too bulky, it's too big. And actually, the way we need to make change is to act locally, starting in our own communities, translating to our state, translating that to our federal government to make the change that will change. The rest of the world basically is waiting for the United States to make that change. And when we were there, we got to hear the Beckley Foundation, which is an English foundation that did a massive study about how we can make change at the international level for marijuana laws. And one of the things that there's 3 different ways we can make the change internationally. One way is to ignore the treaties that the United States has signed. And the United States has a lot of experience doing that, so that is one realistic way to do that. Another way would be to withdraw from the single convention treaty that prevents us from actually completely legalizing everything. Withdraw from it, say we disagree with the marijuana policies, and then come back in, say we're not going to follow that, and then come back in with the rest of the treaty. Or we can create a whole new treaty around cannabis, and it's the way the United Nations works is this, with the last treaty is the one that supersedes everything else. So there are ways of doing it, but really I think the way we're doing it in California is going to change the rest of the world, and we are leaders of the rest of the world, and they're looking at us of how we're doing this in our own state. Another way that we can make change is really to look at the prison system here in California. You know, Schwarzenegger has been ordered to release, I believe, 27,000 prisoners from our prisons because there has been a court order saying that he has to do that because our prisons are too dangerous the way they are, and the health care cannot meet the needs of all the prisoners there. So we are in a situation where we need to be demanding right now the release of non-violent marijuana prisoners, because they don't pose a threat to anybody and it's a waste of space, and so we need to demand that. So that's one thing that can happen. Now at the federal level, Barney Frank has introduced a bill to decriminalize marijuana, and that will take the federal government out of small possession cases. And then right now, if you go to, for example, if you go to Yosemite and you have an ounce on you or something like that, if you go to a federal park or anything like that, they can bust you, and it'll be still, I believe, a felony at that level. Now, Senator Webb from Virginia has proposed a commission to study why the United States is the world leader in incarceration rates. Why do we have 2 million people in prison in this country? We have more people, we have about 500,000 offenses in our prisons today. That is more people in our prisons in the United States than the whole European Union has for all of their crimes, all of their prisons. And they have hundreds of millions more people than we have in this country. Something is totally out of whack in the United States in the way we approach our crime policies and the way we approach our drug policy in particular has created this mess that has filled our prisons and destroyed too many lives of good people. So the Webb Commission, and I encourage us all to be calling Senator Feinstein to tell her to sign on as a co-sponsor of this commission that will demand a look at the whole criminal justice system, at our whole prison system of why we are incarcerating so many people, and to propose new ways of dealing with that. And so I'm hoping that we'll put pressure on people, especially Feinstein. We need her on board. She's not been a very good senator in my estimation up to this point, standing up for us. Get on her for that. So, other good news. He told me I had a lot of time because we had a short. Keep going? Okay. Other good news is that in the future with a more open and let's say that we do legalize cannabis here, which is a real possibility in 2010 if we can get on the ballot and we vote for it and get all of our friends and family to vote for it. In a regulated system, we should have lower prices of cannabis, which I think we need to have because it's way too expensive right now. And Dale mentioned that we could have it for a lot less, even with a hefty tax on it. We could have more varieties. I don't know about you, but I think we should have like labeled varieties from more like very low potency for kind of different kinds of cannabis to a high potency cannabis. I know a lot of people would prefer to have a low potency option so that they can just kind of party and not get too out of it. We will have quality control to make sure we have high quality cannabis, that it's not contaminated, that we know what we're getting. That's a very good thing to have. And hopefully we'll have more like a microbrewery or winery model in this country, I mean in this state, where we can have small mom and pop kind of businesses that sell the varieties that people have been creating and developing, and we hope that people who have gotten very good at cannabis growing will be able to continue as successful business people in the future. Other good news is that we are seeing a growth in the polling at this point, that our numbers are going higher and higher in support for legalization. And what we've seen is a change with people 30 and under especially. They get it. They're much more open-minded. They want to see more personal liberty, and a lot of them have had personal experience with it. We've also seen an increase of support for change amongst baby boomers, and people 55 and older are coming back to using cannabis in higher numbers. I think that's a good thing. We're going to see more and more senior citizens embracing cannabis as a medicine to help with arthritis, to help with Alzheimer's, to help with chronic pain and depression and appetite, and all kinds of issues that cannabis helps, especially with age-related conditions. And I think we're going to see more people using cannabis who are older, and that's a good thing. I think as more and more people come out of the closet, and that's, I think, an important requirement for our progress, for more and more people to come out of the closet and stand up and show our faces and show our neighbors and our co-workers and let people know who we are, that we are good contributing members of society, that they don't need to waste all of their resources going after good people like us. It's totally a waste of money, and it's a total waste of police resources. And we need to, that's an important element that helped in the gay rights movement coming out of the closet to help gain their rights, to lose the stigma that we should not have to hide anymore, that we should be able to be more open and actually have public places where we can go and be ourselves and enjoy cannabis in public. And the last thing I really want to talk about a bit is the West Coast Leaf. We started out with our first print run. It was 20,000 copies. 2 weeks later, we had to do 15,000 more. We started out, our first run was 35,000 copies. Our last run was 122,000 copies. And we hope to keep growing and helping to be a voice for change in more and more places. And we need your help to help us identify more and more places where we need to get our paper. We need more and more people to advertise and subscribe. That's how we get the paper out to everybody. If you can support us in that way, it's a we have subscribers now, not just in California, but in New Jersey, and Arizona, and Utah, Montana, and Michigan. And we're really trying to export our California ideas and models. And people are getting inspired by the writings of good people like Don and Mickey and other people who are contributing to our newspaper, and Dale Geringer, and lots of great writers and great information. And people are looking to this paper saying that, oh, you can do that? Let's try it where we are. And so we're hoping that more and more people will get the paper, and you can help us do that. You can help us distribute it to places around and get more and more people on board. More and more people can learn how to get involved with all the major organizations that we have a listing of in here. We have a calendar in here to support the events that are going on, like the harvest stands and other things like Humboldt Hemp Fest next weekend. And there's lots of great things going on, and we want people to know about it. And we need you to be a part of that change, and we need you to be part of the change that will help us stand up for our equal rights and gain the equal rights that we deserve. So I think I've spoken way long enough, and thank you for your attention to this. Okay. Yeah, there's different ways. I think that Don's going to mention something here, but we also, with Americans for Medical Marijuana, on their website, americansformedicalmarijuana.com, they also have a listing of people in prison with their addresses, and you can write to Americans for Medical Marijuana, and they will send your letter to the prisoners as well. And Don has another suggestion.
Yes, many online resources for that. Also check out americansforsafeaccess.org and the public discussion forums.
And Andre's Special and Capital Wellness Collective are filling out Christmas cards for political prisoners right here, 4 tables down, this middle aisle on the right-hand side. You can fill out a Christmas card that will go to a medical marijuana prisoner. So do that if you have not already. And there are some great lists online as well. I suppose we're here to talk about the future of cannabis and medical cannabis as well. And I'd also like to recognize the present state of cannabis and where we are at. And if you look around this room tonight, I think you'll see a very diverse, very educated, and very talented group of people who've come together to make this movement what it is. And the greatness that has abounded and the things that have come about surrounding this movement never cease to amaze me. I think the aspect that I look at most, I ran a business called Tainted Incorporated. We produced compassionate medicinal edibles. We focused on branding a product with THC in it, which is a very complex issue, especially in the Bush administration. What I received is being a convicted felon for my efforts, but nonetheless, we pressed on and are really proud of, the products that we were able to create. We created 52 different brand name products of cannabis medicines, and I think what you see around you is a lot of different businesses that have come out of this general medical cannabis model, being dispensing collective, being people who are not just growing medicine anymore, but they're growing cannabis medicines and they're marketing them in a sense of being, tested to be clean or marketed different types of concentrate products. There's just a lot of really interesting businesses that have sprouted up. Laboratories, if you look around the room, nutrient companies are now marketing to medical cannabis patients, vaporizer people. So we really just come a long way out of the closet, and I think what you're going to see is, further regulation and issues that come with producing cannabis medicines is going to be a given, and we're going to have to embrace that regulatory process. And by embracing it, it also legitimizes our efforts a lot. So we have a chance to take the dream of what we've seen over the past 13 years since Prop 215 was enacted, really come to be a full-fledged, legitimized business. And we're in the process of seeing that now, and I think it's an evolutionary process. So I encourage people to embrace the regulatory practices and process and really try to form these collectives and businesses and farmers and all the sorts of people that make up this incredibly unique industry and make it take it to the next level. It's going to take everybody's efforts, and I don't think we can afford to fight amongst ourselves and have petty indifferences and let our egotistical ways get in the way of progress. We're all here for the same thing. We love cannabis. I think everybody in this room loves cannabis. And if we focus more on where our common ground is versus where our differences are, I think we would make a lot more progress. And maybe in the next 13 years, we can all look back on this situation and laugh as to, the incredible intolerance and unjust behaviors that we see by law enforcement still to this day. So take your energy, I encourage people to get educated. If you're not aware of what's happening in medical cannabis, there's a lot of great sites out there. Become educated, get networked, talk to the people in line at the grocery store, talk to the people at Starbucks, talk to everybody that you know and make sure that they know that cannabis is not a dangerous reefer madness type situation. They responsible people like me and you and everybody else out here who deserve to be respected use cannabis, and that we, will no longer stand for being looked down upon by our fellow man. So I encourage you to network, and then I encourage you to get active. Get off the couch and go do something. Attending this event's a good start. Just by being here tonight, you're automatically an activist. So pick up a paper, pick up a magazine, walk around the get active. I turn it over to Don Duncan.
Thank you, Mickey. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Don Duncan, and I'm the California Director for Americans for Safe Access. And I want to say a special thank you tonight because tonight's event is benefiting our organization, and thank you so much for coming out to show your support. And a special thank you to our friends at Peace of Medicine who are hosting this great event for us. They do a wonderful job with this every year. In addition to being the California director, I'm also a 10-year veteran of the industry of medical cannabis. I've operated medical marijuana facilities in Berkeley, Los Angeles, West Hollywood, and helped people open them all over the state of California. And I'm so happy to see what's happened in the last year in the industry of medical cannabis. And when we're looking to the future of medical cannabis, the future is very bright. For the first time in the history of this nation, we have an administration who is not hostile to medical cannabis. And that is a sea change from where we were before. For decades, many of you have fought for the rights of sick and dying people to use cannabis as medicine. And for the last 10 years, I have fought side by side with many of you to make that happen. And in January of this year, the whole world changed. The whole thing pivoted around us. We were fighting defense. We were fighting to protect ourselves. We were fighting to stay out of jail. And in January, everything changed in California because we finally had an administration in Washington, D.C. that was willing to be reasonable. And if you're wondering if anything has changed in the new era, in the era of Barack Obama, just look at the fact that Barney Frank and Sam Farr have medical marijuana legislation in Congress that could have never been dreamt of under George Bush. And so the whole world has changed. And if we're wondering, in this whole new world of medical cannabis, where there seems to be an opportunity for federal progress, where the next battles will be, they'll be in Washington, D.C., but I also want you to be aware that those new battles will be in your hometown in California, because we're not yet finished implementing what the voters did in 1996. In 1996, the voters called on federal and local officials to implement a plan for safe access for every single person who needed access to medical cannabis, and that is the great work of compassion that is unfinished in California. And all over the state of California right now, we're having battles with city councils, battles with boards of supervisors on how to implement and how to regulate medical cannabis. And those battles are of crucial importance because in some cities and counties, people who are sick, who have AIDS and cancer and multiple sclerosis, still do not have safe access to medical cannabis. And our work is not done until everybody in the state of California has access to the medicine that they need. And so I want to call on you guys to redouble your efforts on the local level, to redouble your efforts with the city councils and with the board of supervisors or with the neighborhood groups to make sure that every city and county in the state of California has ordinances and regulations and guidelines that uphold the state law and that see to it that patients get the medicine they need. Because symbolic medical marijuana laws that look good on the books but don't put medicine in the hands of patients, those don't work. And we can't tolerate that in California. We need laws in California that put medicine in the hands of the people who need it right now and today. And that's what we mean when we talk about safe access now. Not safe access one day, not safe access if it works politically and it's not right before an election. We need safe access now in California. And while we see the whole world changing on the federal level, I want to encourage everybody to know that here in California, we haven't finished with the city councils and with the neighborhood groups and the board of supervisors. And so I want to encourage everyone to get very, very busy in that effort to make Proposition 215 real in every single community around the state of California right now. And if you're not sure how to go about that, go to our webpage at americansforsafeaccess.org and find out what the local resources are in your city or in your county. We have chapters all up and down the state that can help you make that a reality in your state. So go and do that and get involved in that effort, because before the federal law changes, we can make California what the voters intended it to be back in 1996. And I want to thank so many of you for your support in that so far. And thank you again for coming tonight to help support Peace of Medicine and the Harvest Dance and Americans for Safe Access. Thanks so much.